lesson 4.3, angle, angle, side. So in this lesson, we'll be able to learn to prove two triangles congruent using angle, angle, side theorem. So we've already done side, 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 angle, side, and angle, side, angle. So this is going to be your fourth one. So if two angles and a non-included angle, so in angle, side, angle, angle, side, angle, it was the included side. This time it's angle, angle, side, so the side is not included between the two angles. So if two angles and a non-included side of one triangle are congruent to two angles and a non-included side of another triangle, then the triangles are congruent. So let's start with an angle. So we know that angle A is congruent to angle D. We also know that angle B is congruent to angle E. And the last is the side, which is side BC is congruent to side EF. So triangle ABC is congruent to triangle DEF. So again, the side is not over here. It's not angle, side, angle. The side is after the two triangles. It's not included in between them. So make sure that you have that idea or that concept clear, as that is the concept that most students have difficulties on. All right, let's start this. So you know that YZ bisects angle WYX. That's given. And we know that angle YWZ is congruent to angle YXZ. So that's given. So I'm going to start marking up my diagram. Remember, mark your diagram up. It is super important to do that. So YWZ, so that angle, is congruent to YXZ. Then the other given is that YZ bisects this angle. So when something bisects, what happens? You cut the angle in two equal halves. So we know that this angle is congruent to that angle. So my next line is going to say angle WYZ is congruent to angle XYZ. Definition of angle bisector. So we got angle, angle. So we're doing angle, angle, side. So we need a side. So looking at the diagram, I see that they share a side, right? So they have one common side. So side YZ is congruent to side YZ. And when something is congruent to itself, it is reflexive property. So now you have two angles and the side is after the angle. It is not in between the two angles. So we know that angle WYZ is congruent to angle XYZ because of angle, angle, side. Let's try the new example. So we know we're going to start off with angle ABC is congruent to angle CED, and that's given. And I'm going to mark it up too. ABC and CED And line AB is congruent to CE. So line segment AB, not congruent, sorry, parallel, is parallel. So again, whenever we have parallel stuff, we gotta use alternate interior, alternate exterior, corresponding. Make sure you know to use those relationships. So that's given to. And we have our last one, the C is the midpoint of AD. Given. All right, let's start with C being the midpoint of AD. If C is the midpoint of AD, we know that the midpoint cuts into two equal halves. So we know that AC is going to be congruent to CD. The two halves are equal to each other. Why are they equal to each other? Because of definition of midpoint. So we are using that, and then we could have had, we have to use the other given. That's the parallel lines. So you know that once you have parallel lines, and there's a line, you have two parallel lines, you have this line cutting through it. So when a line cuts through something, you have certain relationships, like alternate interior, alternate exterior. So using that, we know that this angle is going to be congruent to that angle. And because, what are those two angles? So you have angle BAC congruent to angle ECD. And the reason that they're congruent to each other is from the diagram, it's their corresponding angle. Now you know that the triangle ABC, is going to be congruent to triangle CED. You have two angles and a side. The side is not in between the two angles. It is after the two angles. So it's going to be angle, angle, side. Next example, as always, I'm going to start with writing my givens and marking up my diagram. So, PR bisects angle QRS given, and angle PSR is congruent to angle PQR. That's also given. So I'm going to mark up my diagram. So PSR is congruent to PQR. So what I can use from the bisect, my other angle, is PR bisects QRS. So again, if you remember bisect means it cuts it into two equal halves. So this half has to equal that half. So angle PRS is going to be congruent to angle PRQ. And that will be, why are the two halves equal to each other? Because it's bisecting. It's being bisected. So I have my two angles. So I need a side. Whoops. I need a side. And looking at the diagram, I see that they both share one side. They share this. So that means PR is congruent to PR because of reflexive. Oh no, I do not know what's happening. So now from the picture, it shows that I have two angles and a side. So triangle PSR is congruent to triangle PQR because of angle side. As you can see, the side is not in between the two angles, it's after the angles. And the last proof we're going to do is LG is parallel to JM. H is the midpoint of LM. So both of these are given. So let's mark them up. LG and JM, and H is the midpoint of LN. So if H is the midpoint, we know that the two sides are congruent to each other. Whoops. So then we know LH is congruent to MH. Definition of midpoint. We also know that from the picture, you could see that we have some vertical angles in there. So we know this and these are vertical angles. So we're going to say angle LHG is congruent to angle MHJ because they're vertical angles. Next thing is we have another given that we haven't used, and that is it's parallel. So if it's parallel, we know that this angle and this angle have to be congruent. So angle LGH is congruent to angle MJH. And from the picture, and they're using the parallel relationship, those two angles are going to be congruent because of alternate interior angles. So if you use this proof, you could have proved it using angle side, or you could have also used angle side angle. If you use this angle instead, which you could have used as well, and it would have been angle side angle. So last but not least, you ended up with your triangles being congruent. And based from the picture, the triangles are congruent because of angle side. So some of the proofs might have two answers. So if you use these ones instead, you could have gotten angle side angle as your reason. And that's perfectly fine as long as you prove the triangle congruent. Alright, so that is it. And we'll see you in the next lesson.